Hey everyone, today I decided I make a tutorial on how to play the jobava-london, but more specifically, we will be playing it against the kingside fianchetto, as you see on the board. And I will just like to start this video by explaining why I personally don't play the jobava-london against any other setup. Because there are people out there starting with d4, knight f6, and then they play knight c3 on the second move, with the idea that they are trying to grab the center with e4, and here black most commonly will play the move d5, and then they go bishop to f4. And then, if black plays g6, then this just transposes back to our main topic. But the problem is that black has a lot of other setups that he can go for, such as bishop to f5, such as e6, or simply the most common move in general in this London, to play c5. And you have to know how to deal with these systems, but the opening nuances are way trickier, and also objectively speaking, I think black should be able to equalize in most of these variations with correct play. Even though it can be quite interesting and quite fun to play these lines, I think objectively speaking, those are inferior to the normal London main lines that I've covered so far on the channel. And therefore I want to just explain that why we like to play it against the fianchetto. So we will start by our move order, so d4, knight f6, and then important to play bishop to f4 if you're looking forward to be getting these lines. And against g6, we will be playing the move knight to c3, transposing to the jobava-london, with the idea that in all of these systems we have a very powerful idea of advancing our h-pawn, which is particularly effective because black has committed to make this g6 move, which it's not the case in the other jobava lines. If you're trying to play it against everything, as I said, black is not forced to go g6, and they can go for the other lines here, such as bishop f5, e6, or c5. So no g6 on the board will make your life much trickier trying to implement the lines that we're going to be talking about. So now that we made that one clear, we can dive a little bit deeper in our topic. And after bishop f4, g6, knight c3, we are not only preparing to launch our h-pawn into the attack, but we are also threatening to grab the center with e4. And here I feel like the higher rated players are going to be making the move d5, which is most common for the Grunfeld setup, and we will be covering that into the second part of the video. So if you're interested into that line only, you can check out the timestamps in the description of this video, and it will take you directly to that part. But we will start by covering how to deal with the bishop g7 move, because this is generally the most common way that I see it played on the internet precisely. And a lot of King's Indian slash Pirk players are just gonna be making this move, not really being bothered by our setup. And this is pretty good news, because I feel like white is getting very good chances for an edge in the upcoming positions. And here we will be grabbing the center by playing e4. And here black can generally do three main things. They can play d6, which is the main line, or they can go short castle, which again I feel like a lot of people play in shorter time controls, as they simply tend to pre-move this fianchetto and then the castle. And last but not least, there are people trying out this kind of surprising d5 move, which is actually way trickier than it may seem at first. Because if you play the normal e5 move, hitting the knight, then black will get a lot of counterplay after the knight e4 move, with ideas to break in the center with c5, and I feel like black is getting very decent counterplay. So instead, against d5, most precise way to play would be to go knight b5 first, hitting that pawn on c7, and now after knight a6, the idea is that we can push e5, and knight e4 is no longer that effective, so we can just kick it with f3, and you can see that all of a sudden there is no square for the e4 knight. as in the previous line he was able to just trade on c3 if we make the same move. So that is one of the key differences and why we play knight b5 in the first place. So after e5, they will go knight to d7. This is the move now to retreat the knight, and now we can continue with something like queen d2, and after c6 we have achieved our goal of stopping black from getting counterplay with knight e4, so we can just go back to c3. There is no way, no particular reason to go to the edge by playing knight a3, and after knight c7 king could continue like knight f3, after knight e6 bishop h6. Again, like, you never really want to allow black to take your bishop with the knight for free. Knight f4 is a big positional threat here, and we always just like to avoid it, and we do by gaining a tempo with bishop h6, also threatening to get rid of the enemy fianchetto bishop, which is one of the key defensive pieces that black has on the king side. And after something like bishop trade and queen b6, we can just castle long. We can always go king b1. It's a very useful move to have, and then just throw in the h pawn on the king side with h4 and then h5. And black's got some issues with his king, and he's also struggling to finish development. So white has a pretty good position here, and I think that is pretty much what you need to know about this this kind of tricky d5 move. Just go knight b5 first, and you should be good to go. And then we can move on to another kind of tricky line, which is short castle, and it's tricky in a way that if you play in the most natural way, then black might be able to get away with it. Or let's say if you don't really know the specific details, I think you are actually missing out on some value, because this is quite a played line, and from my experience I have faced it in online games quite a bit, and again, I wasn't really that well prepared against it, and always I felt like, well, I can just go e5, go queen d2, go for the normal stuff, and then my opponents were just getting a lot of counterplay. So the trick here is to go e5, and after knight e8, what I generally was doing wrong in this line, I was playing queen d2, which is maybe not such a bad move, but it gives black a lot of counterplay after c5. And I've had this in my games, and it was like really annoying to play. So the trick is to play queen to e2 instead, and the idea is if they go c5 now, well, we can just take it. And on queen a5, first of all, there is a very annoying queen b5 move that you can play, but also I think what you can also do is just castle along, with the idea that queen takes on c5 will be met by knight to d5. Not only hitting that pawn on e7, but creating a massive threat of going b4. And once we're going to be playing b4, then you can see that the black queen is kind of running out of squares. So black is already in huge trouble in this position. So c5 not really working all that well here. Therefore, black is having a much trickier time to find any counterplay. And the game could continue like d6, but then we can just castle long, and on knight c6 we can just continue with our standard play by going h4. And if black tries to stop us from advancing even further, we can just go f3. And we're gonna be breaking with g4 next, and just trying to open up lines on the king side with a very nice initiative for white, and quite a big edge, to be honest. So yeah, I think again, if you just are familiar with this idea of going e5 and then on knight e8 you can go queen e2, I think you are already good to go against the short castle line on move 4. So now we can actually move on to the more mainstream stuff arising after the move d6, which is the most common, just making sure that we will not be able to kick black's knight with e5. And now we will be playing queen to d2, and there are basically two big lines in this position that black can go for. One of them is to commit and castle, and the other one is to postpone castling and play c6. And I feel like this c6 move is a little bit trickier, and maybe a little bit less common, I would say. So we will cover it in the second part. We will start with short castle first, and against this we can just castle long. And I figured out that there are three main continuation that black goes for in this position. Even though there are many legal moves that they can try, I decided that it will be the most useful to just cover c6, knight c6, and then knight b to d7, which is actually the most common one that they play online. And this is actually quite a big inaccuracy, and it gives white a big initiative after the move e5, hitting the f6 knight, and all of a sudden black is having a very hard time finding a square for that knight, because if they just go on the edge with knight h5, we can go bishop to h6, and if they try to break the center with c5, white can simply take on g7, take on d6, and play knight f3 with a very nice edge for white. When there's a very nice game played by white in this position by Richard Rapport against Getz in 2018. That is a very nice model game that white ended up winning. And instead of playing knight h5, if they take on e5 immediately, we can just take with a pawn, hit the f6 knight once again, and after knight g4, we can just play knight f3, and h3 on the next move will actually end up trapping the g4 knight, so white is doing very well. And on knight h5, we can just play bishop to e3. The main idea being that if they take on e5, well, we can just hit that knight first, and after knight f6, we can go h5. H4 with the idea to push h5, open up the h file for our rook, and the pawn deficit is not really felt, and white has a big initiative for the sacrifice pawn because black's pieces are literally stacked. Not stacked, but stuck. And yeah, black just struggles to create any threats, and we are ready to get our own play going. So yeah, knight bd7, quite a frequent move that they play, which gives us a big edge after e5. And the other move that I found out to be quite popular is knight to c6, which we will be answering by playing f3. This is always a useful move to have, not only preparing to advance our pawns with like g4 and h4, but also keeping an eye on this pawn on e4, which can be vulnerable in some lines. If black somehow delivers a6, b5, and then b4, we will have to move away the knight, and then that pawn on e4 can become vulnerable. So yeah, here against knight c6, we'll be playing f3, and a very common mistake that I've noticed people tend to make in this position is that they just go e5, and the problem with this is that we can take on e5, and then we can trade on d8, and the black players are generally relying on this trick that after bishop takes on e5, they go knight takes on e4, which if white would not really be that accurate and just takes on e4, yes, black will get away with bishop takes on e5, and it's actually a slightly better position that black has, even though it's would be closer to equal, I would say. But the problem with this line for black is that after knight e4, there's a very concrete line that we can go for. We can take on g7. Notice that if black goes for knight c3, well, some people may overlook that the bishop can take back, thinking that, well, they just take with the pawn and we recapture, and we have equalized. I think black is actually maybe a bit better here, but just say it's equalized materially speaking. And the problem is that they tend to forget that after knight c3, well, just recapture with the bishop, and we are up a piece with a completely winning position. So you should not be afraid of that, and instead, after bishop takes on g7, point for black is to go knight f2, and yes, our rook is trapped in the corner now, but we can go bishop to f6, hitting the d8 knight, and black will reply with bishop to d7, making sure that the knight will be defended. We can just go knight e4, hitting the f2 knight, and after knight takes on h1, we can go g4, and next up we are ready to play bishop to g2, collect that knight from the corner, and we will be having two minor pieces for the rook, which is gonna be leading to a winning advantage. So yeah, I think again, you can like exploit a lot of players in this line where they go e5, and yeah, their main King's Indian trick with knight takes e4 is looking nice, but it's not really working. So moving on, to the other line that black has here. They can also play a6 with the idea to try to create counterplay on the queen side with b5, but here I like to go h4, and after h5 I really like this queen e3 move, stepping back from the d file and creating a threat of pushing e5, and you will see that there is quite annoying pressure on this d file after pushing e5. So if black plays something like e6, we can just go bishop to g5, again reinforcing the threat of going e5 because now the knight is pinned. Something like queen e8, we can just go g4 with a big initiative on the king side. And if black plays after queen e3, let's say knight to d7, well, we can just go g4 this time. And you should not really be afraid of the complications arising after bishop takes on d4, because we can just recapture with the rook, and after knight takes, the trick is to not collect the knight because that will run into e5 with a lot of play for black. But we can just leave that knight there for a while and take on h5, and we're going to be focusing on the black's king for now. And after e5, we can just play bishop g5, hit the queen, and after f6, there's bishop to h6. And if they take on h5, we don't even need to rush with collecting that exchange. We can play knight e2 with ideas to use the g file for our rook. With a much better position for white already. So yeah, I think that should be covering the knight c6 move, and with that being said, we can advance to one of the most common plans in this Pirc, which is the c6 move. And first of all, in order to understand this little pawn push, the idea is to just prepare advancing on the queen side with b5, a5, b4, a4, and so on. As we do advance on the king side, black is seeking for his own play on the other side of the board. The problem with this plan, though, is that generally white is going to be faster, and yeah, we will see how the game continues, because we'll be playing f3. Again, this is like a very useful move to have, as I explained a little bit earlier. And after b5, we'll be playing bishop to h6. Again, this is a very common move in this structure, very typical, just preparing to trade off black's fianchetto bishop so that we can get closer to the enemy king. And now in this position, black has many ideas to go for. I think we will start by covering the most straightforward one with b4, but there are also moves such as queen a5 or going a5 immediately that we will look on. So on b4, we will be just moving the knight away with knight e2, and there's already a threat of taking on g7 and collecting that b4 pawn. Make sure to not take on b4 immediately, because that will just drop the a6 bishop, which is going to be like really painful. And in this position, black generally plays queen a5, hitting that pawn on a2. And here we will be playing king to b1, defending it. And now black generally tries to go for this direct attack with bishop to e6, creating again another queen takes on a2 threat. So here we have a very nice move, and I think this is again like kind of lesser known, I would say, even though for like professional players it's like very natural. You can play knight c1 here, and even though some of you may be skeptical about the placement of this knight, because you know, it looks kind of passive on c1, the reality is that that knight does not really belong anywhere else on the board, and you know, it's just very useful. It's just making sure that our king is gonna be safe, and we can, after this move, just focus on our own play. So knight c1 is actually very good move, and the knight is a very well placed piece there. And now the game could continue like knight b to d7. We will be pushing h4. Again, we generally try to go h4, h5 immediately, sacrificing the pawn to open up the h file. Going g4 is again like very typical and can be good in a lot of positions, but h4, h5 is normally quicker and better. So after rook b8, again, there are like many ways that you can play, but the best one would be to take on g7, and after king takes, there's a very nice idea to push h5, and this is pretty normal. But what's interesting is that after knight takes on h5, we can go g4, hitting the knight, and after knight f6, there's a very nice sequence that the white has at his disposal, and you can maybe pause the video, try to find it on your own, but it is quite a difficult one, and it starts by pushing the pawn to d5. And yes, the pawn is literally takeable. Black has a lot of control over that square, but tricky is that after cd5 we'll be playing knight b3, intermediate move hitting the queen, and after queen b6 the point is to throw in the check first with queen h6. Now if black goes back with the king, well, we can just take on d5, and all of a sudden black's bishop is trapped on e6, because taking on d5 will allow the final punchline of the line. We can just take with the rook. Main issue being that if knight takes, we can just checkmate black on h8. So I think that's quite a nice line that you want to keep in mind when there is this bishop on e6. This is not like the most common way to deal with these lines, but when you see that bishop on e6, it can kind of ring a bell, and you can try to kind of recreate this pattern that I shown. So yeah, that should pretty much cover b4. If they go a5, this is not really all that critical. I want to quickly show you a nice reaction that you can go for against this queenside expansion here. I like knight b1 a little bit better. I think knight e2 is also fine, but knight b1 is a little bit better because on b3 we can just take with the c pawn, and then it actually is much better to just play a3. Make sure you keep that queenside closed, making this rook kind of pointless on the a file. Even though it's still pretty active, it doesn't really attack much, as there are no open lines, as it will be really tricky for black to open up the c file. And yeah, I mean, this is literally better than taking that pawn, even though speaking from a materialistic point of view, you are up a pawn in this position. But I mean, black will get a lot of like annoying ideas such as rook a1, the pawn is doubled, he can use it as a target. I mean, it's just that you're giving him a lot of annoying pressure. Yes, I think if you turn the engine on in this position, it will still give white an edge, but practically speaking, in a lot of these situations, let's say we're not talking about this position specifically, let's say we're talking about like a Sicilian in general, well, in those lines, this could really make a huge difference whether you're winning or losing. So yeah, I just wanted to show this little detail. And after bishop h6, there's also a queen e5 move, creating a threat of pushing b4, and then the pawn on a2 will remain undefended. And the funny part is that here we can just ignore it and focus on our own play with h4. And after b4, we can just play knight b1, and if black decides to go on an adventure, take on a2, we can just advance with h5, and on knight b to d7, we can take on g6. They will most of the time just take with the f pawn, because taking with the h pawn is generally common for the Dragon Sicilian, but in this case it just gets mated, because we go queen h6 and then mate on h8, and yeah, I'm making this comparison to the Dragon because this is quite common, even though we are looking on a Pirc with the pretty typical positions in the Dragon as well. So after this, I think taking on g6, they take with the f pawn, as I was saying, but then we can take on g7, go queen h6. They will play king f7, but then we have a very nice knight coming into to g5, and white is actually much better here, because even though black managed to capture that pawn on a2, there are no pieces that black can utilize to create threats against our king, and knight g5 is quite a big threat on the next move, and white is just much better in this position. And I think last but not least for this variation against the King's Indian, if they play knight b to d7, let's say not taking that pawn on a2, well, we can just go h5, and after knight takes on h5, we can take on g7. And they kind of have to fianchetto the knight, and after queen h6, knight f6, we can go g4 with the same idea of going knight h3 followed by knight to g5 with a lot of attack along the h file. And something pretty funny that I've noticed while analyzing these positions is that if you turn on like a weaker engine, we can just do a small experiment. If we switch the scene here, This is what my chess base looks like. And if we turn on like a, let's say, older Fritz, let's say we turn on the Fritz 11, it will say that, well, there's like a -1.5 position, which generally means black is very close to winning. And this would be like a little bit misleading, as if we use like a stronger engine. Let's actually um, turn on something else. Okay, I think I might have opened it twice by mistake, but the point that I'm trying to make, let's open like the cloud, and I will try to open up like a Lila Zero engine, and we will also open up a Stockfish 14. And those are like premium engines, and I'm paying ducats to use them, but they are much stronger than the average engines. And if we turn on the Stockfish 11 once, it was actually Fritz 11, not Stockfish 11. If we turn it on once again, I will just need to readjust them quickly. You can see here that stronger engines are giving this position as winning for white. And if you're looking on it with a weaker engine, it's totally misleading saying that black is winning. And I just wanted to point out this thing, because maybe a lot of you are using weaker engines that are kind of misleading. And yeah, I just wanted to open up your eyes about this. So before we moving on to the Grunfeld setup, I mentioned earlier that in this position, black can also play the move c6, which is delaying castling, and it has the idea that black will just not commit this early, and he is trying to avoid our kingside aggression. So here we will be playing the move bishop to h6, and if they castle, we will transpose back to the c6 lines that we have just looked on. And here the point is to take on h6, and then black normally plays the move queen a5, which is creating a concrete threat of knight takes on e4, because our c3 knight is bent. And in this position, we will be answering this move with bishop to d3, which is a little bit surprising, as normally f3 is such a common move. And here it's also like just defending the pawn. But the thing is, we will no longer be playing for this kind of kingside aggression with g4 and h4 and so on. And the idea after bishop d3 is that we are switching to a more positional play with like knight f3 and short castle. So then it makes a lot of sense to just develop our bishop, and also keep in mind that there is also no other better square for our light squared bishop, as if we go bishop to c4, it could be potentially targeted by b5, and if we go bishop e2, well, then the bishop would be just a little bit more passive there, or rather than passive, I would say it would be less active. So black normally plays b5 here, and now we will be playing knight f3 without fearing the move b4, because we can just go knight e2, and we are also preparing to reroute this knight to the g3 square. And if black goes for this sort of tempting check with b3, we can just play c3, and after taking on a2, we can simply castle short, and we will be collecting that a2 pawn sooner or later, because we can continue with a move such as b4. We can go back with the queen on d2, making sure to collect that pawn if black tries to somehow stick to it, even though he cannot really do that. So what would be much better? In this case, more normal would be to play the move knight b to d7 in this scenario, and white can continue with castle short, and we will be following a pretty high profile game between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and a very talented youngster from Iran, Parham Makhzudlu, played in 2020. So the game continued bishop a6, and now Magnus took, went knight to g3, because now the e4 pawn is vulnerable. And you can have all kinds of ideas in this position, like pushing e5 if allowed. And for this reason, Parham played queen b5. But Then rook e1 played. Again, like reinforcing the threat of advancing with e5, so that's why black played e5 himself. But now white can simply play rook a d1, and there will be many weakened squares along the d file, as we can take on e5, insert a rook on d6 in the right scenario, and black's issue is that his king is still kind of stuck in the center. So white was much better and ended up winning that game. And with that being said, I think we have covered the most important lines of this King's Indian setup, and we will be moving on to how to deal with this Grunfeld lines arising after d5. So against d5, we will be playing the move e3, making room for our pawn to advance, opening up the queen's path, so that we will be able to take twice on h5. So this may sound a little bit crazy right now, but I will start by showing you one of the most important lines for this whole setup against the Grunfeld. So black normally continues with like a bishop to g7 in this position. Now we're throwing in the h-pawn, and this is really the key idea that you need to remember, because this is a little bit of move by move stuff, and you have to make sure that there is no knight on f3, because the way people try to normally do this in the wrong way is by having the knight on f3, because, well, they simply develop it there because they don't remember, and that knight on f3 will actually stay in the way of the queen, which will make this line less effective. So make sure that you have this exact setup on the board. I don't know, just try to think about these pieces this way, kind of working together. And if black does fall for our trap and castles, we will be playing h5. And if black does not take, well, we can just take on g6, open up the h file for our rook, and we get a big attack. And if they do take on h5, which is literally what everyone would do, then the idea is to just sacrifice the exchange here with rook takes on h5. And this idea was fairly new a few years back, and usually giving up the exchange in such fashion is quite double-edged, and you know, it gives chances for both sides. But in this particular scenario, it is actually very strong. It is engine approved, and it gives a big edge for white. After something like takes, we will be taking with a queen, and looks like I have added way too many arrows in this position. But the point that I'm trying to make is that, well, first of all, the pawn on d5 is hanging. So black normally chooses to defend it here by pushing c6, and now the idea is to develop the bishop to d3, threatening to mate on h7. And in this position, black needs to block the checkmate with f5. And the key thing that you need to remember about this type of positions is that after a long castle, black will usually be seeking for a queen trade with queen e8. And the only thing that you have to avoid once you sacrifice the exchange is to trade queens in these positions, because you really need the queens on the board in order to create any kind of initiative. So we will be just keeping queens with a move such as queen h2, also pointing out towards the b8 knight, and after like knight to d7, we can continue with knight f3 with the idea to bring our rook to h1, attack on h7 once again, throwing g4 anytime soon to open up even more lines with just a big attack for white on the king side. But there is also another pretty tricky line that black has, which I think is quite important to be familiar with, is that on queen h5, black can also kind of ignore the d5 pawn by playing the move knight to d7, with the idea that if you go for the most normal move of taking on d5 with the knight, hitting the c7 pawn as well, they can play c6, and if you just step back with the knight, they can play the move knight f6, which is hitting our queen and also getting that knight closer to the king side, which will make it much harder for us to get a big attack going. So the thing is, in this position, you are not worse or anything, but black has improved his situation quite a bit, and the game is pretty unbalanced right now, and it is just better to meet knight d7 with ignoring that pawn on d5, just play bishop to d3, and after knight f6, we can just again sidestep with the queen, play queen h4, and we will be castling long on the next move, and then we can follow it up with ideas such as bringing the knight to e5 via f3, and then we can just start advancing our g pawn with g4 and g5. And yeah, black is just having a very hard time getting any kind of counterplay, because if he plays c5 immediately, we can just go d takes on c5, and he will be struggling to regain the pawn. So these positions are very good for white. This is literally where you can score a lot of wins in these lines, and I highly advise you to rewatch this video if you feel like you missed some of the details, because this is like a really important line that should be kind of your foundation as a jobava-london player, so to speak. And with that being said, we can move on now to the alternatives that black has, which are mainly on move 5. So right after we push h4, black has many moves. The first that we covered, it was short castle, the most natural one. We will also be dealing with how to reply when black just blocks our pawn push with h5, obviously, but we will leave that as the last thing that we will cover in this video, because I think it's the main line. And again, if you just want to go there, make sure to check out the timestamps that we have in the description. And next up on the list, it is the move h6, because again, this is quite a common idea with the point of answering h5 with just advancing with g5. And this again can be pretty tricky if you see it for the first time, and you get kind of stuck with your attack and you don't really know how to continue. But on h6, we can play the move knight f3, and if black goes for a short castle, thinking that, well, he can safely answer h5 by pushing g5, well, there are some big problems for black in this line. The bishop takes on g5, because we can go for this temporary piece sack with the idea that we can go h6 hitting the bishop, and on bishop h8 we can just take that pawn on g5, and on knight c6 we can continue with h7, and king has only one square left, which is the g7 one, and after queen to d2 we are ready to castle long. On the next move we can open up things with e4, and I don't know, black is up a piece at the moment, but is that bishop on h8 really impacting the game? That is really a question that you have to ask yourself before you are going to be playing this line. And I can tell you that this position is just completely winning for white, and you should give it a try in case black goes for h6. But one thing that is left to cover is if they take on h5 this time, we will be sacrificing the exchange once again, and now we will be stepping with the knight in the center of the board by playing knight e5. That's the bishop f5. We can just collect the pawn on h5, and on e6 we can just castle long with the simple and straightforward idea of going bishop to d3 and then bringing our rook to the open file with rook to h1. So white again is having the initiative. And another very kind of tricky attempt that black has is to play the move c6 here, and this is a little bit subtle, and I think, you know, I know it may be pretty tricky to actually understand these details, and especially if you are a newer player, this might look kind of overwhelming, as black has like so many tries on his own. But I mean, you know, once you kind of get good at these things, once you master the small details, you really build yourself like a lifetime weapon that you can successfully use in your game. So on c6, well, what is the point of this move? First of all, you have to ask yourself, so why we don't just continue with the normal fashion of going h5 and then sacrifice the exchange, because it doesn't look like it changes much. Because if black goes short castle, then we can just go bishop d3, get back into the lines that we just seen. But the idea behind black's play is that he's delaying short castle first of all, and it will be much harder to hunt that king if it has not chosen his side just yet. And black can play knight d7 in this position with the idea to bring the knight to f6 next, and then it's just gonna be way trickier for us to get anything going. Actually, if you turn on the engine, it will give a slight edge to black, and I think for good reasons. And yeah, you have to just kind of stay away from this idea if they are very tricky and they play c6 here. But again, like, this is not really that common. Not so many people are familiar with this idea, but even if they do, there is a recipe against it as well, because we will be playing a preparatory move. We will be playing bishop to e2 with the idea to go h5 next, and well, we can go for this without even needing to invest material, because if black just goes castle, we can go h5, and this time we will not need to just give up the rook. This time we can just take it with the bishop with a winning position, obviously. But again, pretty clear that black will not allow this, and they will play h5, trying to just block our kingside expansion. But we can just play knight f3 with the idea to just go knight e5 next. This is again like a very common idea. When they push h5, you just go knight f3, knight e5. The knight is just very annoying there. And on bishop g4, we could continue with knight e5, and then bishop takes, queen takes, knight b to d7. We can just castle long, and the idea is to always play king b1, very useful move to have, and then we can push our pawns on the king side with f3 and g4, and white just has a very easy game. So that should be dealing with this trickery after the move c6, and with that being said, we can dive into the big main lines arising after the move h5. So as I said in one of the previous videos where I was dealing with the London traps, queen f3 is an interesting move in this position, with the idea that on castle, yeah, on castle, I think it was the trap, we can play queen to g3, and now if they play c5, the problem is that we can throw in bishop c7 first, and then the queen moves, and we just collect the ba knight, and we just win. But I feel like, from objective point of view, this line is a little bit inferior for white, as if black is precise and finds c5, well, we cannot really fight for an edge. It's just like a very messy position after something like bishop b5, knight c6, knight e2. The game could continue like bishop g4, queen g3, and after taking on e2, you have to really remember this bishop c7 idea and then take back with a knight. But this line wasn't really one of my favorites, and yeah, I don't really recommend this to be one of your main weapons. It's just like a funny way that you can try in your blitz games. If you try to get like a quick win in case they play short castle and you go queen g3 here, surprising them. And yeah, the main move that I'm recommending against h5 is to play knight f3, and the idea is to just answer castle short with knight e5, and if black tries to stop us from getting there by going bishop to g4, well, we can just go queen to d2, just breaking the pin, threatening to go knight e5, and we should not fear bishop takes on f3, because that simply improves our position, because we can just recapture. We will be castling long on the next move, and then we will be pushing in the center with e4, with a very nice position for white. And after castle, we will be playing knight e5, as I was saying, and the main source of counterplay for black comes after c5. We'll be going queen to d2, and now after cd4, ed4, knight c6, I like to play f3, just making sure we are controlling the important e4 square, and we are also preparing to play g4 in the future. And after bishop f5, in this position, a lot of people have played the move long castle, or also they have tried taking on c6, but personally, I think I found quite a new idea for white, which is pretty fresh here, to play bishop to b5. Putting pressure on the c6 knight, with the idea that on rook c8 we will be taking that knight, and then we will be playing knight a4, heading towards the c5 square. And the game could continue like knight e8, but then g4 is a very strong move, hitting the bishop, and black has to really find this precise counterattack with f6 that I've just shown. And here I found a sexy move for white. We can just throw in knight f7, hitting the queen, and after rook takes, we can take on f5, and after pawn takes, we can go knight c5. Idea to throw in knight e6, and we can castle long, play bishop h6, go rook g1, with a lot of interesting play for white, even though the position should still be quite balanced if black finds the very precise continuations that he has. So on bishop b5, black can also take on e5, which will be answered by pawn takes, hitting the knight. After knight e7, we will not be rushing with taking on d5, but we will be castling long, with the idea that on knight e5 we can play rook e1, hitting the knight, and on knight c6 we can just go bishop to h6. Ideas of g4 are in the air, with just very nice compensation for the sacrifice pawn, and a lot of play for us on the king side. So yeah, with that being said, I think we have covered most of the critical lines that we had to in this jobava-london. So yeah, just to make a quick summary of what we've just seen against bishop g7. We go e4, they go d6, and then we go queen to d2, with the idea to castle long, play f3, go bishop h6, go h4, h5, with attack on the king side. And if they do go for this Grunfeld setups, then it's important to play e3, and then bishop g7, just throw in our h-pawn, with the idea to go h5 next, and yeah, try to get in these kind of nice exchange sacrifices, and typical ideas that are quite powerful. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you feel like you learned anything useful, make sure to subscribe to the channel, so you're not gonna be missing any videos just like this one. Make sure to check out my London playlist in case you want to see also how to deal with lines such as d5, or such as the Queen's Indian, or whatever line that you may have encountered, because I have covered all the important lines in the on the playlist. And yeah, I hope you're having a good one, and I'll see you around. Take care.